"You'll rot here," my son said. He didn't know I had the nurse record everything. My name is Eve. I'm 52, and until that morning, I believed kindness was a language my family still spoke. The house smelled of cinnamon from the toast cooling beside me. I'd been writing a grocery list when Mark burst in, his voice sharper than the drawer he slammed. He wanted to move me into a care arrangement, to make things easier. He meant for himself, not me. The kitchen was our old peacekeeper. The table where his father once carved initials still carried the mark of a family that laughed more than it shouted. But that morning, every scrape of chair legs sounded like accusation. When he shouted those words, they stuck in the air like dust. He didn't see the small recorder under the folded napkin. I'd bought it after too many nights of being told I imagined things. I pressed the button as he stormed off, the device catching his words clean. Later, the nurse would confirm what she heard, proof that I wasn't losing my mind, as Mark had claimed. I sat there, the clock ticking too loudly, a faint trace of cinnamon turning bitter in the air. I whispered to the empty kitchen, "He won't make me disappear." That was my first line of defense, spoken more to steady my own heartbeat than to threaten anyone. I remember the nurse arriving that afternoon, smiling the way professionals do when they're unsure which truth to trust. She took my blood pressure, avoided eye contact, then said softly, "He was upset, wasn't he?" I nodded. "You heard it?" She hesitated. "Not officially." When I played the recording later, her expression changed. Eyes wide, jaw set. She asked to keep a copy for procedure. Her word, not mine. I watched her write a note about family distress in the file before she left. That note would travel further than either of us knew. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel like mine. The smell of disinfectant from the nurse's gloves lingered, cutting through the cinnamon. I realized I was holding my breath. That night, Mark sent a message. "You need help. Everyone knows it." I stared at the screen until it blurred, half from tears, half from disbelief. How quickly care turns to cruelty when control is threatened. I decided to act before he could tighten his grip. The next morning, I walked to the bank. My knees ached, but I told the teller I wanted to limit access to my account. "Just temporary," I said. The words trembled, but they were mine. By evening, neighbors were calling, asking if I was all right. Mark had already started his campaign, whispering that I'd been confused lately. "Poor thing," one of them said. "Maybe she shouldn't live alone." Every kind phrase felt like a shovel full of dirt. I made tea, staring at the photo of my husband, wondering what he would have said. Maybe something simple. "Don't let them write your ending." The nurse called that night. Her voice steadied me. "I documented it," she said. "You did the right thing." Will they believe me? They will now. When I hung up, I realized how fast truth needs witnesses. Without her, the story would have belonged to Mark. I filed a complaint with the nursing supervisor first thing the next morning. They promised to look into it. Cold words, but official ones. I sat back at the kitchen table, the one that had seen every argument and apology. The house smelled faintly sweet again. I knew that scent would fade, but for now it told me I wasn't powerless. Still, I couldn't stop replaying his voice in my mind. "You'll rot here." Maybe he thought the words would stick. Maybe they will, but not the way he intended, because now they were recorded. She said it, clear as day. "You never listened to me," my sister said, soft and cold. "It used to be our ritual. Every Sunday, tea at 3, same chipped cups, same old kettle whistling sharp through the quiet. The sound once meant comfort. Now it marked tension." I sat there waiting, checking the clock, realizing she'd rearranged the week again without telling me. My pills were late, the nurse delayed. I felt a kind of quiet panic that only routine breaking can bring. The nurse looked at the chart, frowning. "It says you canceled." "I didn't," I said. She hesitated. "Your sister called, said you wanted a rest day." That was the first time I saw it written. My own words twisted in someone else's handwriting. My sister had taken control of my care schedule to help. That's how she phrased it when she finally appeared at the doorway, arms folded, smile stretched too thin. "I'm just trying to make things easier." "For you or for me?" I asked. "For both," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the steam rising from the kettle. The whistle filled the kitchen, so loud it hurt. I turned it off, heart beating against the quiet that followed. The nurse handed me a note later, folded small. "You missed 2 medications yesterday," it read in neat handwriting. "Log adjusted by family." My breath caught. Proof, tiny but real. I went back to the sitting room, calendar open on my lap. Someone had crossed through the doctor's appointment I'd waited 3 weeks for. I stared at the ink, blue, not black like mine. I felt stripped of something invisible but vital. My right to decide when to see the doctor, when to take my own medicine. That night, the conversation turned into something uglier. "You don't trust me anymore," she said. "You changed my schedule." "I corrected your mistakes." "I didn't make any." She stepped closer, voice dropping. "You're imagining things again." Those words hit like ice water. I'd heard them before, from our mother years ago, in the same tone, meant to shut me down. I didn't answer. I simply wrote everything down, the missed times, the lies, the note. Because memory fades, but ink doesn't. The nurse, my quiet ally, found me in the hallway the next morning. "You should request an incident report," she whispered. "If it's written, it counts." I could see fear in her eyes, like she'd seen too many families use care as control. "I will," I said, "and I'll sign it myself." When the manager called Jane in to discuss the miscommunication, my sister turned on the tears instantly. "She's confused. You can see how tired she gets." I spoke over her, steady this time. "I may be tired, but I'm not confused. Check the log." The nurse produced the appointment slip I hadn't known she'd kept. The room went still. The manager glanced from Jane to me. "We'll open an incident report," she said flatly. That one sentence, dull as it sounded, felt like air returning to my lungs. Back home, I sat at the table again, the clock ticking too fast. The whistle stayed silent this time. I couldn't bring myself to boil water, to pretend the ritual meant what it used to. Instead, I turned the calendar to next week and wrote everything in my own ink, large, black, unmissable. If she wanted to help, she'd have to ask. The stakes were simple: my independence or her control. There was no middle ground left. Later that night, I heard her on the phone in the hallway. "She's slipping," she said. "We might need to take over soon." My pulse kicked hard. I stepped closer, just enough for her to see me listening. Her eyes flickered with guilt, then annoyance. "They changed my name on the list." "There's no money left," I read, stunned. The words didn't make sense at first. I checked the balance again, thinking it was a system error. But the numbers were right there in black ink. $3,200 gone last week, another $1,500 before that. The paper felt rough beneath my fingers, and I remember running my thumb along the edge just to keep steady. I whispered the figures out loud, trying to convince myself I'd misread. I hadn't. The clerk across the counter gave me that professional half-smile people use when they want to look calm. "Maybe a family member helped with transactions?" she said gently, as if I might break. I swallowed hard. No one was supposed to touch this account. Her eyes flicked down, scanning the page again. "There's a note on file. Power of attorney authorization." "For who?" She hesitated. "Jane." The air left my body in one long, cold breath. My sister had always been organized, tidy, the one who balanced her own books down to the cent. She'd told me once that responsibility was love in numbers. Now I saw what that really meant. I asked for a printout of the transactions. The printer hummed, spitting out pages that felt heavier than they should have. I studied the dates, 2 withdrawals in 3 days, a signature that looked close enough to mine to fool anyone glancing too quickly. The clerk cleared her throat. "Would you like to place a temporary restriction while we investigate?" "Yes," I said, immediately. By the time I left the branch, my hands were shaking. The afternoon air felt thick, almost oily. Outside, people queued at the ATM like it was any ordinary day. I clutched the papers close, hearing their faint rustle, like the sound of something being torn quietly apart. At home, I called her. "Jane, what is this?" "What?" she said too fast. "These withdrawals." "Oh, that. I moved some money to handle bills." "What bills?" "You don't have to get so defensive. You've been under stress. I thought I'd help." I waited, counting my breaths. "Without asking me?" "You'd have just worried." The silence between us stretched thin. I heard her exhale, a faint click of her pen, like she was already writing me out of the story. "You're welcome," she said finally, then hung up. I sat with the papers spread on the table, tracing the printed names and dates. The same table where I'd once balanced the family budget with my husband, careful down to every grocery line. I thought of how easily trust can vanish, like ink fading from paper left in the sun. The next morning, I met with a different clerk, one who spoke more like an investigator. "If you believe the authorization is forged," she said, "we can freeze the account, but it will also freeze any standing payments." "I understand. Once the review starts, it can take up to 2 weeks. Do it anyway." As she typed, I noticed her pause at the screen. "It's strange," she said. "The notarized document was uploaded yesterday, but the notary's stamp date is last month." A forged date. A trail. She printed a confirmation for the freeze. The paper bore the bank's seal, freshly stamped, red against white. I held it carefully. It felt like the first solid thing in days. That evening, Jane called again, her voice pitched sweet but shaking underneath. "You froze everything at noon. Do you know what that's done? You've made me look like a thief." I stayed quiet. "Say something." "I don't need to," I said. "The numbers already did." Her voice broke, low and sharp. "You'll regret this." When she hung up, I placed the papers in a folder and slid them into the drawer beside my bed. I realized the stakes weren't just money. They were proof of who still held control over my life. Tomorrow I'd file a formal complaint. The bank would see the truth eventually, I told myself. Still, I couldn't stop looking at that stamp, that red mark sealing everything inside a single moment. The paper, cool and dry under my fingertips, felt almost alive. They froze everything at noon. "If I speak up, I lose my job," she whispered. Her face was pale under the fluorescent light above the nurse's station. It buzzed faintly, the kind of sound that makes silence feel tense. I leaned against the wall, still holding the small recorder I'd used that night. The light reflected on the metal clip of her badge, making it flicker as she fidgeted. "I can't afford to lose this," she said again, softer this time. I wanted to tell her that truth should protect her, but I'd already learned it doesn't always work that way. "They'll find out I spoke to you," she said. "No one has to know your name. You don't understand. Your son knows people here." That stopped me. "He's been talking to the staff?" She nodded, glancing toward the hall. "He says you're confused, that you don't remember things clearly." There it was again. The same weapon they kept using against me. Doubt. If they could convince everyone I was unstable, every fact I had would turn to fog. My own memory, my proof, my voice, all fragile once they labeled me unreliable. "I just want to make sure what you said that day is written down," I said. "The recording, do you still have it?" She shook her head. "You told me to delete it." I swallowed. I did, because I was scared too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway clock clicked over to 8 o'clock, loud and clear. The world outside continued. Shifts changing, call buttons ringing, while inside that small room, truth sat between us, heavy and waiting. "I'll add a note," she said finally, eyes fixed on her clipboard. "But not my name." "That's enough," I said. "That's something." The next day, I went to the medical office and asked to file an addendum to my original complaint. The clerk frowned, flipping through papers. "Anonymous submissions take longer," she warned. "I can wait," I said. as long as it's recorded. That decision cost time, but it also protected her. And maybe, in some strange way, it gave me back a sliver of dignity. Later, Mark stopped by unannounced. His charm was polished, his tone rehearsed. "You're still stirring things up," he said. "The staff think you're paranoid." "I'm not. Mom, they're just doing their jobs." "They are, and one of them told the truth." He smirked, glancing at the file on my table. "You really think anyone believes you anymore?" His words felt calculated, like small darts aimed to bruise, but not bleed. I stood up slowly. "You should go." "You can't keep shutting people out," he said, pretending concern. "I can, when they lie." He left then, shaking his head, loud enough for the nurse outside to hear him mutter, "She's losing it." I saw her flinch but say nothing. That night I watched the corridor light shift from white to amber as evening rounds began. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the small recorder again, now empty. Proof gone, but courage building. I'd asked for anonymity for her sake, but I still had the right to be heard. The next morning, the same nurse slipped an envelope under my door. Inside was a single sheet. A typed note describing the incident, unsigned, dated only with the month. No name, but the phrasing matched her way of speaking, careful, factual, brave in its quiet way. It wasn't enough for a full case, but it was enough to start one. Protective Services called 2 days later. They said they'd opened a confidential intake. I didn't ask who made it happen. I already knew. I caught sight of her that evening walking to her car. She didn't wave, just touched the badge clipped to her pocket, as if to say she was still standing. I whispered to myself, "So am I." As I locked the door that night, I felt a strange calm. They could call me paranoid all they wanted. Truth had already begun its own path. She set her phone down and pressed record. 2 transfers in 1 week, I listed aloud. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking from the old wall clock. I sat with the printed transaction sheet spread across the table, the paper edges curling slightly from the printer's heat. Each line held a number that didn't belong. $4,200 on Monday, $600 on Wednesday. My pulse matched the pattern, short, uneven beats. I circled the amounts with a pen, pressing harder each time, the tip nearly tearing through. The account specialist from the bank, he called himself Martin, sat across from me, watching. "You said your sister manages some of your bills?" "She used to," I said. "Not anymore." He adjusted his glasses. "These transfers were made using online access, same user ID." I met his eyes. "That's impossible. I don't use online banking." He hesitated before replying. "Then someone does, in your name." I remember the sound of the ATM from that week, sharp and mechanical, spitting out cash while I stood at home unaware. That sound stuck with me, as if each beep had been another warning I ignored. I traced the printout again, the ink still fresh enough to smudge. "Who authorized it?" "The log shows Jane's credentials," he said. "But she must have had your password." The betrayal was one thing, the arrogance was another. She hadn't even tried to hide it. The withdrawals were neat, scheduled, like clockwork. Small calculations made by someone who thought I'd never look closely enough to notice. Martin cleared his throat. "If you'd like, I can start a reconciliation process, but I'll need written authorization." "I'll give it," I said. He slid a form across the table. "Sign here, and we'll open a review. It's not immediate, but it freezes questionable transactions." "That's enough," I said. "I just need it on record." He nodded, but his tone softened. "This can strain family relationships. You should be sure before escalating." "I'm sure," I said. "I've been sure since the moment I saw the numbers." When I left the branch, I felt the air hit colder than usual. I knew filing the form was the first step, but I also knew Jane wouldn't take it quietly. She depended on the silence that came from people like me, too tired to argue, too embarrassed to accuse, but I'd crossed that line now. By evening, my phone buzzed, a message from her. "You really think I'd steal from you? Maybe you should get checked out again." Again. That word. It was how she tried to rewrite every truth as confusion. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed every document I had into an envelope and sealed it. I wrote bank review across the front, the pen tip digging deep into the paper. I wasn't mailing it anywhere. I just wanted the proof locked in one place, where she couldn't touch it. The next morning, I called my lawyer's assistant. I need to file for temporary conservatorship over my own assets, I said, before someone else does. The assistant hesitated. That's unusual. So is stealing from your sister. Within an hour, I had an appointment. The stakes had changed. No longer about missing money, but about control over my life. Jane was already dismantling my independence piece by piece. If I didn't act now, she'd finish the job. That night, she came by. "Why are you making this so hard?" she asked. "You took my money. I moved it, for your bills. You cashed my check." Her jaw tightened. "You're paranoid, Eve. People are starting to notice." "I'm not paranoid. I'm prepared." She stood there, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with anger. "If you start dragging me into this legally, you'll regret it." "I already do," I said. 2 days later, the bank called to confirm they'd assigned an investigator. It was official now. No more family talks, no more polite phone calls. Everything would have to go through records, forms, signatures. Jane might have thought she could manipulate people, but she couldn't manipulate procedure. I held the stamped envelope again, still sealed, the paper inside stiff and heavy. For the first time in months, I felt the edge of safety. Not peace, just safety. The phone rang again that evening. I didn't answer, but the voicemail caught her voice. "You really want to make this public? Fine. But don't forget who helped you when no one else would." Her help had a price tag, and I'd already paid it twice. She cashed my check 2 days after. "You are the problem," Mark said in front of neighbors. He chose a sunny afternoon, the kind that brings people to porches and open lawns. The air carried the fresh smell of cut grass, sharp and green, like someone had tried to tidy the street just for this performance. He stood on my steps with a pitying smile, and I knew what was coming. The story where I'm unstable, and he's the dutiful son. "I'm trying to help her," he announced. "She forgets things. She wanders." I felt the small tremor in my hands and kept them still at my sides. I looked past him to the hedges where faces hovered, half hidden. A few phones were out, not recording, just fidgeting. Hearts love a story about decline until the ending refuses to match the gossip. I spoke evenly. "You need to leave." "I'm warning the neighborhood," he said louder. "She's not safe alone." "You're scaring people," I replied, stepping back so I wouldn't smell his cologne. "I'm saving them trouble," he said. A short laugh from across the street broke the spell. Mrs. Lane, the neighbor who's knocked on my door for years, walked over with that steady gait that makes you feel seen. "Enough," she said to him. "I see her most mornings. She's fine." Mark tilted his head. "With respect, you don't know what happens inside." "I know what happens on this porch," she said, eyes on me. "And I know who raises their voice." His tone sharpened. "You don't get it," she exhaled. "I get cruelty." I turned so both of them had to look at me, not through me. "This is my home. You're not welcome here without agreement." There it was, the line I hadn't drawn cleanly before. He tried to switch tactics. "We're arranging extra help. She keeps missing her meds." "No," I said, and the words steadied something inside. "I authorize my care, not you." He stepped one stair up, then stopped when he noticed the small knot of neighbors growing at the curb. Time for him to test shame as leverage. Spikes hit, quick and bare. "Open your door." "No. You're confused. I'm clear. You'll regret this." "Not today." His face changed. The charm slipped, and the temper underneath flashed for a second before he stuffed it back down. He glanced at the crowd, then at me, and staged a sigh. "This is sad," he said, projecting to the street. "We're doing our best." A murmur rippled. I chose my next move, knowing the stakes. If I didn't answer his public lie with public truth, the lie would take root. I turned to Mrs. Lane. Would you write down what you've seen? Dates. Simple details. I already did, she said, tapping her tote. And I'm not the only one. That sentence gave me more than comfort. It gave me leverage. I'm authorizing my advocate to review my recent records, I said, loud enough for the hedges. Voluntarily. My voice surprised me. Level, not pleading. Mark scoffed. You think papers will save you? They'll save the facts, I said. That's enough. He tried one more angle, softening his tone for the audience. I'm worried she'll hurt herself, he said. I won't, I answered. But you are hurting me now. Another neighbor, Tom from the corner, stepped closer. I heard her ask you to leave. Mark cut him a look. Stay out of it. It's already public, Tom said. I watched the scene tilt away from Mark, 1 degree at a time. That was all I needed. A shift, not a victory lap. I faced the group. If you have something you've seen, write it down. Don't argue with him. Just write. Mrs. Lane put a folded page into my hand. I wrote the date and what I heard, she said. Short and plain. She added quietly, I can give a copy. I slipped the page into my pocket like a small anchor. Thank you. Mark saw it and bristled. Conspiring now? Documenting, I said. When he finally stepped off the top stair, I felt the decision settle inside me. Restrict his access to me and to my doorway. I walked to the front desk at the residence before dinner and signed a simple instruction. Only scheduled visits, I said, and never unaccompanied. The manager nodded, weary but firm. We'll note it, she said. The next morning, administration called. Due to recent events, the manager said, we're requesting a formal behavioral assessment. It's policy when there are conflicting reports. Schedule it, I answered. I'll cooperate fully. I named the advocate who could receive my records, and I gave consent in writing. If he wanted to play at concern, he could meet actual process where it lives, in forms and signatures, in quiet rooms where volume doesn't count. By late afternoon, a few neighbors slid notes under my door. Short lines, ordinary handwriting, enough to show a pattern. I placed them in an envelope and wrote the date on the flap. Evidence, not theater. Mark showed up once more at the main entrance, face calm, voice low. This is petty, he said. It's a boundary, I replied. Obey it. He stared past me to the manager's desk, did the mental math, and made a choice. He turned without a word. The staff member pressed a button. They closed the gate behind him. Sign here, the solicitor said, calm and clinical. The papers gleamed under the hallway light. The pages were thick, smooth, too polished to belong to me. I reached out anyway, feeling the slick surface between my fingers. It felt wrong before I even read a word. The man adjusted his tie and smiled like someone used to easy compliance. It's just a formality, he said. Routine paperwork to streamline your care. I read the first line twice. It wasn't routine. It was a transfer. My home, my last anchor, shifted on paper to another name. Jane's. I looked up. You brought the wrong document. He blinked once. It's standard for cases like yours. What case? Guardianship arrangements, he said smoothly. It protects everyone involved. His tone was patient in that way that sounds like superiority dressed as kindness. I folded the page back, careful not to crease it. I'm not signing. He gave a short breath that passed for a laugh. Refusal could cause delays in your benefits, and legal costs accumulate fast. It's better to sign now before complications arise. Whose idea was this? I asked. He tilted his head. It came from the family side. They're concerned. The air thickened. My throat felt dry, as if the words on that page had already stolen oxygen. I placed the papers flat on the table. If they're concerned, they can show up themselves. He hesitated, then slid a pen toward me. I'm only here to witness the signature. You'll be witnessing a refusal, I said. He looked at his watch. You're creating unnecessary trouble. I've lived long enough to know what trouble looks like. This is control, not care. For a moment, silence stretched long enough for me to notice the hum of the radiator. The paper felt cool against my palm. I handed it back. He took it reluctantly, then tucked it into his briefcase. "You'll hear from us," he said. "Delays aren't in your best interest." "Neither are thieves," I answered. As soon as he left, I called my gatekeeper, the legal assistant who had helped me file the last complaint. She came that afternoon, steady as ever, briefcase clutched tight. "Let me see what he left behind," she said. "He didn't leave anything," I told her. "Then I'll check his copies." She made a few calls while pacing my living room. "He filed a digital draft early this morning," she said finally, scrolling through her phone. "But it's not identical to what he showed you." Her tone sharpened. "The draft online has a different clause, no mention of voluntary consent. That's illegal." "So they altered it?" "Yes. Someone tried to fast-track a signature you never gave." We went through every line of my existing documents, comparing phrases, punctuation, even seals. When she pulled up the scanned version the firm had on file, she frowned. "Look here." She zoomed in on the notary seal. "This one has a raised border. The one they showed you was printed flat. The seal was different." The realization hit harder than I expected. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something like insult. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd sign anything that sounded official. "What do we do now?" I asked quietly. "We preserve everything," she said. "I'll file a notice of potential forgery with the Bar Association. Keep the copy you saw untouched." That night, I placed my unsigned copy inside an envelope and locked it in the drawer with the rest of my papers. The metal key was cold against my fingers. I could still feel the faint residue of that smooth paper texture on my skin, as if deceit had left a film there. The solicitor never called back, but 2 days later, a letter arrived, short, curt, and unsigned. It mentioned delays in financial processing and non-cooperation. No header, no signature block, just words meant to unsettle. I folded it neatly and slipped it under the same key. I've learned that control often hides inside politeness. They wrap theft in legal paper, lies in kind smiles, manipulation in official seals. But this time, I had both a witness and a record. The gatekeeper confirmed she'd submitted the notice. "They'll have to respond formally now," she said. "It's out of their hands." I nodded, the tension in my chest easing slightly. For the first time, I realized every refusal was a form of proof. Every no carved space for truth to stand. Before bed, I opened the drawer again and touched the envelope's corner. The paper felt heavier now, like it had grown teeth of its own. The seal was different. "They believe me now," the nurse said, low and relieved. The room was all white surfaces and long shadows. The overhead light made everything look sharper, the papers, the faces, the doubt that had hung around me for months. I sat in the front row of the small hearing room, hands folded tight. The air carried that sterile brightness hospitals and courtrooms seem to share, the kind that exposes every flaw. She took her place at the table, glancing once in my direction before looking down at her notes. Her voice was steady. "I was there that day," she said. "I heard what he said. The recording matches exactly." I exhaled quietly. It was the first time anyone besides me had said those words aloud. The board member leaned forward. "To confirm, you're saying the conversation was not fabricated?" "No," she answered, clear and calm. "It was real. She didn't imagine it." There it was, the pivot point. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reckoning. I had waited months for this moment, through forms and interviews and polite dismissals that all meant the same thing. "We don't quite believe you." Now the tide was turning. The nurse's statement was entered into the record, signed and dated, her handwriting looping neatly under the official header. I caught sight of the timestamp at the bottom, 11:35 a.m., and committed it to memory. Mark wasn't in the room, but I could feel the weight of his absence pressing on the door. Jane was, though, sitting 2 seats away, face arranged into polite neutrality. She didn't look at me once. When the nurse finished, Jane shifted in her chair, crossing her legs with careful irritation. She'd lost the calm advantage. "She's confused," Jane began, directing her words at the panel. "The nurse has always had issues with management. This could be retaliation." The lead officer cut her off gently. "We verified the recording." Jane blinked, mask slipping just a little. "Then I'll be filing for guardianship today," she said. "She needs proper oversight." I turned toward her. "I refuse consent." "You can't refuse," she said, voice low. "Yes," I answered. "I can." And I just did. A murmur moved through the room, small but noticeable. The nurse's pen tapped once against her folder, a nervous rhythm that broke the tension. She'd done what I couldn't do alone, turned a story into proof. When it ended, the officer announced that Protective Services would move forward with a preliminary review. The words sounded simple, but I understood the meaning. They finally had to listen. Outside the hearing room, the hallway felt dimmer. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead, flickering like a tired clock. The nurse joined me at the bench. "They'll keep me on record," she said. "It's official now." "You did the right thing." She smiled, small and exhausted. "I almost didn't. It's not easy to speak against family connections." "I know," I said. "That's how they win, silence." She pulled something from her folder, a copy of her sworn statement. "Keep this," she said, "in case it gets buried later." I took it carefully, feeling the weight of the paper. Proof doesn't have to shout. It just has to exist. "Thank you," I said. "You won't need to thank me when this is over," she replied. "You'll have your life back." As she walked away, I stayed seated, staring at the empty corridor. The same light that had made everything feel harsh now seemed to illuminate something else, possibility. For the first time, I wasn't alone inside my own version of events. By the afternoon, my lawyer called. "The agency confirmed your side," he said, "but Jane's petition for guardianship was filed 2 hours ago." "Of course it was." "She's arguing you're being manipulated by staff." "I expected that too." "We'll respond in writing," he said. "Stay calm." That evening, I read the copy of the statement again. Her words were plain, professional, and true. No embellishment, no pity, just facts. It was strange how something so quiet could be the loudest proof of all. I thought of the clock on the hearing room wall, how it had ticked loud between every pause, how each minute had stretched longer than it should. That sound stayed with me, not as anxiety this time, but as a kind of rhythm, the rhythm of things finally turning in my favor. Later, when I filed the paper into the folder that held every other document, complaints, letters, notices, I realized this one was different. It wasn't a defense anymore. It was offense. I closed the folder, pressed my hand over it, and whispered to myself, "Now they'll have to face me." Her words were read aloud. "This will ruin us," Jane hissed in the hall. The petition waited at the clerk's counter like a loaded trap. When the document slid toward me, the room's ordinary chatter thinned, and the stamp came down with a crisp crack I felt in my ribs. That sound carried authority. It also carried threat. I traced the heading with one finger, then read the lines where she described me as incapable, forgetful, unsafe. She didn't even bother to mask the contempt. The clerk cleared her throat. "You may request a copy." "I want it," I said. She paused. "And to contest?" "Yes." The stakes were simple. Either I fought now, or I surrendered the keys to my life. My hands steadied as I read. She listed incidents that had been arguments, not episodes. She framed care as chaos, and my boundaries as proof of decline. A neat story, if no one asked for receipts. I walked to the bench with the petition. The lawyer I'd retained, the practical one who never promised miracles, sat beside me. "You understand filing means discovery," he said. "They'll dig." "Let them," I said. He nodded once. "I'll need your consent in writing to release selective medical summaries." You have it. He scanned the accusations. She's stretching small moments into patterns. I know. He looked up. We can push back, but a judge won't like a public feud. I don't like theft dressed as concern. Then we proceed, he said, voice low. He flipped to the back page. A hearing will be scheduled. His finger tapped where the clerk had stamped received at 11 a.m. He looked at me again. You're sure? Completely. We built the answer in plain language. I authorized the advocate's access. I listed the witnesses who had written what they saw. I refused guardianship. Calm words, hard spine. The clerk watched me sign. The stamp hit again, echoing against the glass. He softened and pushed back once before helping, like good ones do. Understand this will cost money and time. It may not be quick. I understand. Then I'm with you. Back home, I opened a fresh envelope and began a ledger of this fight. Not the whole life, just the bruises you can count. The filing fee was $300. The evaluation letter would cost $450. The courier to serve notice was $120. The certified copies totaled $80. The running total came to $950. Numbers do not care who cries. They only add up. I placed the receipt beneath the nurse's sworn statement. Paper doesn't love me. It doesn't hate me. It just agrees to be what it is, if you keep it safe. Late afternoon, word of the petition rippled across the residence. Faces dipped, pity flashed, gossip warmed its hands. Mark called the manager to flag concerns. I walked down and issued a simple instruction. Restrict his visits to scheduled times only. The manager nodded, adding it to the log. Process is colder than rumor. That's why it works. In the evening, Jane found me in the corridor. Withdraw your objection, she said. No. You're being stubborn. I'm being clear. You can't manage things. I already do. She leaned closer, smile brittle. I'm trying to save the family. Start by telling the truth. I just did. I stepped back. Then write it under oath. I wouldn't disappear quietly. I wouldn't be folded into her version of me. My lawyer called after dinner. The court accepted the contest, he said. They'll set a hearing within 14 days. Expect a summons. I'll be ready. We'll deliver copies to your neighbors who offered statements. Good. Keep them short. Keep them plain. Night settled without peace, but with position. I filed the petition copy into the folder that had become my armor. I could still hear the clerk's stamp in my head, decisive as a gavel. It told me the fight had moved from whispers to paper, and paper is a ground I can hold. They set the date in ink. Do you understand these allegations? The judge asked. The room felt smaller than it looked. Wood panels, heavy light falling through narrow windows, and rows of faces turned toward us. I nodded once, my palms pressed against the worn gloves I'd kept folded in my lap. They were my small armor, holding the scent of a home I might lose if she won. Jane sat across the aisle, chin lifted, eyes scanning for sympathy. She found some. 3 neighbors whispered her name with nods, one leaning forward to see me better. The sound of their murmuring rippled faintly before the bailiff's gavel snapped the air. Silence carried weight. The judge looked down at the file. This is a guardianship petition alleging incapacity, financial mismanagement, and neglect of personal welfare. I understand, I said. Do you contest it? I do. He turned to the side. Call your first witness. The nurse approached the stand. Her hands shook slightly when she raised them to swear in. The light hit her face just right, showing she hadn't slept. State your name and occupation. She did. Then came the heart of it. You were present on March 12th? Yes. And what did you hear? Her voice carried steady now. Mark said, "You'll rot here." I confirmed it later on the recording. A low rustle moved through the back row. Someone whispered, "That's awful." Someone else murmured, "But maybe he was frustrated." The judge didn't stop them. He only waited. Every sound felt magnified, bouncing off the wood. The prosecutor turned to me. "Is that the recording you provided?" "Yes," I said. "It's the same file entered last month." The nurse continued. She never raised her voice. She just turned on the recorder to protect herself. I caught Jane's eye across the table. Her mouth twitched. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering fast. I could see her finger tap against the petition copy. Impatient, angry. The bank investigator was next. A tall man, calm as paperwork. We reviewed the account activity. 2 withdrawals of $4,200 and $600 made in consecutive days, unauthorized. The freeze remains in effect until ownership is clarified. Jane interjected. That money was for bills. He replied. The documentation didn't match her signature. The crowd murmured again, 2 voices overlapping. That's serious. She's lying. Then another. Maybe it's misunderstanding. The judge raised a hand and the sound died. I steadied my voice. I am not broken. The words came out clean, carrying more than I expected. I have records. The judge nodded. We've seen them. I called for help, I said. No one came until she filed this. Jane slammed her hand flat on the table. Because you're not capable, she said, voice echoing too loud. You don't even know how much danger you cause. The judge's tone dropped cold. Control your temper, Ms. Harris. She forced a brittle smile. I'm concerned for her welfare. You're concerned for control, I said softly, but the microphones caught it. The sound traveled across the benches, clear enough to reach every ear. I saw one man in the audience nod. The judge turned to the nurse again. You verified the incident independently? Yes. And you're willing to have your statement entered as part of the evidence? Yes, Your Honor. He scribbled something down. The bailiff collected the papers and passed them forward. The moment the document hit the judge's desk, something changed. The light through the high window shifted onto Jane's face. She flinched, just slightly. The judge leaned forward. These statements will be accepted for deliberation. Jane's attorney whispered something to her, but she didn't listen. She sat perfectly still, smile frozen, hands gripping the table so hard her knuckles turned white. I looked down at my gloves again, worn and soft, the thread loose on one seam. The air moved differently now, still tense but thinner, like a cord finally fraying. I breathed, just once, slow and steady. Around me the sound of the court recorder typing filled the room. A rhythm that meant the truth was finally written where everyone could see it. The judge leaned forward. "Shame on you!" someone shouted from the gallery. The sound cracked through the room before the bailiff's warning could settle it. The judge didn't react. He simply gestured toward the clerk to continue. I sat there, spine straight, hands folded, trying to breathe evenly. The court microphone glinted under the light, its small red bulb blinking like a pulse. The air carried that electric stillness that happens right before a verdict, where everyone waits for the next word to land. The clerk pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room, too loud at first, then leveled to clarity. "You'll rot here," he said. The sound was plain, not distorted, not exaggerated. You could hear the scrape of a chair, the tone of authority laced with cruelty. The recording went on, short phrases cutting like glass, things he thought no one would ever hear again. The crowd fell silent. Every breath in the gallery seemed to pause, then a whisper. "He said that?" Another voice murmured, and then another. So she was right. Jane shifted, a quick tremor in her composure. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently, but she didn't respond. The judge's gaze stayed fixed on her. "Is that your brother's voice, Ms. Harris?" She hesitated. "It sounds edited." The investigator spoke from the side table. "It isn't. We verified the file's integrity. It was recorded at 10:17 a.m. on March 12th. The timestamp echoed in the stillness like a closing door. I stared down at the table, at the faint ring left by someone's coffee mug. That simple mark became the shape of my patience, worn, ordinary, unremarkable, but permanent. For months, I'd been dismissed as unstable, and now the evidence they demanded was playing out loud, every syllable undeniable. Jane cleared her throat, voice cracking just enough to draw pity. "This is being twisted. She misunderstood. He was frustrated." The judge interrupted. "You filed an affidavit stating no verbal threats were ever made. Are you revising that now?" She stammered. I was advised to simplify the statement." "By whom?" Her silence was answer enough. From the back row, someone whispered, "Liar." Then another voice rose. "She used them both." The noise swelled, an uneasy hum of judgment and disbelief, until the gavel struck once, twice. "Order!" the judge said sharply. The crowd hushed again. He turned to me. "Do you have anything to add?" I met his eyes. "Only that I tried to be heard before today. No one listened until now." He nodded slowly. "You've been consistent. And this recording corroborates multiple witness statements. The court will issue a temporary order of protection effective immediately." Jane gasped. "You can't. This is bias. Everyone here is against me." "This court has no bias," he said evenly. "It has evidence." She stood abruptly, chair scraping across the floor. "You're destroying a family." I spoke quietly. "You did that yourself." The clerk began typing again, the keys striking fast. The judge continued dictating. Voice steady. "Restriction on all unsupervised contact pending further review. Any attempt to influence witnesses will result in contempt charges." Jane sank back into her seat. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she shrugged him off. For once, she didn't speak. The microphone's hum filled the silence she left behind. The nurse, seated behind me, leaned forward. "It's over for now," she whispered. "For now," I repeated. But even in relief, there was exhaustion. Winning in public didn't erase what had been lost in private. The bailiff began clearing the aisle, ushering people toward the door. One man said softly, "Good for her," while another murmured, "That poor woman." I wasn't sure which of us they meant. Maybe both. The judge stood. "This matter will reconvene in 10 days. All parties are bound by the interim order." He signed the page in front of him, ink catching the light as the pen lifted. The sound of the signature was almost imperceptible, yet final. The clerk read from the sheet, voice clear and deliberate. "Effective immediately, the respondent is restricted from contact pending formal review by the county court." Jane's head dropped. I felt the weight of years loosen, just slightly. For the first time, the system spoke louder than her lies. They read the restrictions aloud. "We inventory the house," the trustee said. He laid the clipboard on my dining table and started at the top drawer. The paper rasped each time his pen moved, a dry scratch that caught against the cardstock as though truth itself had a rough edge. I stood close enough to see the fibers lift where his pen pressed. He didn't rush, and that made it worse. Every pause meant another absence confirmed. "Call out anything you know was sold," he said. "Or taken." "The oak dresser," I answered, "and the gold locket from the bedside dish." He nodded, checked a box, and wrote neatly. The room was quiet, except for the pen and the occasional creak of the floorboards that used to announce company and now just reminded me what was missing. We moved to the sitting room. "The sofa," he said. "Gone," I replied. "The armchair?" "Sold." "By whom?" I held his gaze. Jane arranged a pickup. He didn't react. He just wrote. "We'll need documentation, receipts, transfers, messages." "I have some," I said. "Not all." That was the ache, proof with gaps where conscience should have been. By midday, the assistant brought a box and set it on the table. Inside were the small things: empty velvet pouches, a key without its ring, a folded receipt for packing tape. The trustee read aloud the figures he'd verified. "Furniture proceeds, $20,400, he said. Then, jewelry proceeds, $800. He added 2 more lines where the trail went cold. Books, $0 recorded. Linens, $0 recorded. He drew a line and wrote the sum. Total, $3,200. I looked at those 4 lines until they steadied me. Money isn't meaning, but it is measure. and if we don't measure what was taken, nothing returns. He glanced up. Do you authorize recovery? I do. He nodded. We'll notify counsel and seek restitution. The assistant frowned, then offered the pushback good allies give. If we press too hard, they'll cry hardship. I met her concern. They already do. The stakes are my home or their story. We proceed. We went room by room. The kitchen felt smaller once the tall stool was gone. The empty space made the wall clock seem louder than it should. I noted 2 items I knew had no market value, but mattered to me. A chipped teacup, a sun-faded photo frame. Count them, I said anyway. He did. Sentimental, no proceeds, he murmured. It sounded like a benediction for ordinary things. A quick rattle at the latch froze us. Jane stepped into the hall, eyes flicking to the clipboard. You can't just tally what's yours and mine, she said. It was never yours, I answered. I used the funds for care, she snapped. Do you want people to think you're ungrateful? I want them to know the truth. Spikes broke clean. Put the list down. No. You're petty. I'm precise. You'll lose everything. Not today. The trustee cleared his throat. Ms. Harris, we're concluding an inventory pursuant to the court's order. You may submit receipts. She laughed once. Receipts? For favors? Then they weren't favors, I said. They were sales. She turned on the assistant. You're enabling her. The assistant didn't flinch. We're documenting. Jane's voice softened into the tone she saves for spectators. This will ruin the family. I didn't ruin it, I said. I'm cleaning it. She left with a slam door that shook dust from the frame. The trustee didn't comment. He returned to the list and read it back, each line slow and exact. We corrected a description, added a note about the dresser's carved edge, and flagged the locket as a gift from our mother. He wrote that too, gift, because some words matter even when they don't change the total. He prepared the packet for filing. The assistant dated each page and slid them into a sleeve. We'll recommend restitution, the trustee said. The court can order repayment or offsets. Do it, I said. I'm done negotiating with ghosts. He capped his pen and handed me the copy. The paper felt firm under my thumb, the fibers catching again. A small reminder that records are built from friction. I set it beside the folder from the hearing and the envelope of neighbor notes. The pile had become a strange monument, grief translated into pages. He looked at me once more. Final check. Any last items? Just this, I said. I want the key recorded as mine. He wrote it down. The assistant squared the stack, opened the file, and guided the binder through with patient care. She looked to the trustee. He reached for the pen. They signed beside each line. The court finds in favor, the clerk announced. The words landed quietly at first, almost drowned by the shuffle of papers. Then they settled, rippling through the room like a slow tide of comprehension. The judge adjusted his glasses, the light from the high windows falling across the bench, outlining the seal on the judgment folder. I gripped the edge of the table, steadying myself as the clerk continued reading. Guardianship petition denied. Interim protections upheld. Restitution recommended. It was official. The balance shifted, finally, toward truth. Jane sat motionless beside her attorney. Her face stayed fixed in a neutral line, but her hand trembled just once before she folded it beneath the table. Across the aisle, the nurse let out a quiet breath, the kind people hold for months. I didn't turn, but I felt it. The sound of relief is almost a kind of grace. The clerk handed the folder to the judge. He signed, then pressed the seal into the page. The faint pressure left a raised circle, still warm from contact. That mark would outlast the moment. He looked toward me. You may make a final statement if you wish. I stood. I asked to be heard, I said. I asked for honesty. He nodded once. Both requests have been granted. The judge's pen tapped twice on the desk. The court also finds sufficient basis for restitution. The respondent is to provide accounting within 60 days. Mandated counseling is ordered. Contact remains limited to scheduled supervision." The clerk recorded every line, each one another small repair to the damage done. Jane whispered something to her attorney, sharp, low, but the microphone caught fragments. Appeal. Bias. Publicity. Her lawyer touched her arm. "Not now," he muttered. But she rose anyway. "This isn't justice," she said. "It's revenge." "No," I said quietly. "It's record." Her voice rose. "You think this fixes what you've done?" The judge cut through it. "Sit down, Ms. Harris." The room fell back into stillness. After so many months, it wasn't triumph I felt. It was exhaustion threaded with something cleaner, a fragile steadiness. Paper and ink had done what pleading could not. Facts finally had weight. The nurse placed her bag down and leaned slightly forward. "It's over," she whispered. "Not entirely," I said, "but the truth's on file." The bailiff moved to escort Jane out, but she twisted back toward me, voice breaking into a vow she couldn't swallow. "I'll appeal this. You won't stay protected forever." I didn't answer. The court doesn't debate threats, it records them. The judge stacked his notes and spoke without looking up. "The matter of restitution will remain under review. Compliance required within 60 days. His tone had no edge, only finality. Even his calm carried authority. He turned to the clerk. "Enter judgment." The clerk typed, slow and steady. I watched each keystroke like a heartbeat. The gavel struck once, a single measured sound that echoed just long enough to close one chapter and warn another not to open the same way. As the crowd dispersed, the nurse touched my shoulder. "You did what they said you couldn't." "I just stayed," I said. "Sometimes that's enough." I glanced at the photograph still in my folder, the one of the house before the locks changed, before the furniture was sold. It didn't feel like nostalgia anymore. It felt like evidence that something once belonged to me and might again. The trustee joined us by the doorway. "You'll receive the written judgment in 3 days," he said. "I'll frame it," I replied, "next to the seal." He smiled faintly. "Closure looks good on paper." The bailiff dimmed the lights above the bench. For the first time in months, the room didn't feel like a trial. It felt like a release. Jane's footsteps faded down the hall. The clerk called one final line for the record. They read my name last. "I make tea at 7 now," I tell the empty chair. Steam rises from the cup, curling toward the window, where the morning light falls soft and even. The scent of cinnamon fills the room again, familiar, but changed somehow. It used to mean comfort. Now it means survival, a small claim of peace after months of hearings, filings, and arguments that hollowed out my days. I sit, let the warmth reach my fingers, and listen to the faint hum of the street outside. For the first time in a long while, I don't flinch at the sound of another car pulling up. The photograph on the mantel is back where it belongs. The frame was repaired, the glass replaced, the dust wiped away by a kind neighbor who refused to let me face everything alone. She checks in every Thursday, brings scones, stays just long enough to be sure I'm still steady. "You're getting back to normal," she says. I smile, though I don't believe in that word anymore. Nothing goes back. It only settles differently. I remember the steps that led here, small, stubborn decisions. Turning on the recorder that day, signing the freeze order when everyone warned it would cause trouble, walking into court when my legs felt weak. None of it heroic, just survival written in bureaucratic ink. A letter came yesterday, the appeal filed but stayed pending review. The protective order remains. I read the stamped words twice, then folded the paper and slipped it beside the restored photo. It's strange how authority, once so distant, can feel like protection when it finally listens. The judge's ruling still echoes in the quiet, short, measured, and final. Jane's voice lingers too. "You'll rot here," she said once, cold and certain. I'd carried that sentence like a bruise. Now it's just a memory, stripped of power. I whisper back into the stillness. "You won't rot me." The air absorbs it, calm and plain. The restitution payment started last week. 2 checks, each for $800, arrived in crisp envelopes marked by her attorney's seal. The trustee confirmed the schedule, quarterly transfers until the total reaches the ordered amount. Money can't repair betrayal, but it draws a line that stays visible. I keep the envelopes unopened for a day before depositing them, just to remind myself the system can work if you drag it into daylight long enough. My days are quieter now. The phone rings less. The lawyer sends brief updates, short, neutral sentences that sound almost kind. The appeal remains inactive, one note said. We'll notify if it changes. That's enough. I don't need daily battles anymore. What I need is the ordinary, rebuilt by routine. At 7, the kettle whistles. I pour, stir, and set one cup where another used to sit. It's a small defiance, this act of continuing. The chair opposite me stays empty, but the silence isn't hostile now. It's mine. Sometimes the neighbor joins me. "You're early," she teases. "Old habits," I answer. She glances at the photo. "You ever think about moving it?" "No," I say. "It belongs there." She doesn't press. We talk about weather, grocery prices, small things that don't ask for courage. When she leaves, I tidy the cups, fold the napkin, and notice how the cinnamon scent lingers just long enough before fading. Never too strong, never gone too soon. I've learned to live inside small details again. The sound of the postman's shoes on the steps, the faint whistle of the kettle as water begins to boil, the rhythm of ordinary time returning, 1 minute at a time. The house feels different, not haunted anymore, just real. Each drawer closed, each document filed, each boundary kept. I still lock the front door twice, though. Habit, not fear. Outside, the neighbor's son waves as he passes on his bike. I wave back, and for a second, the weight of it all eases. Justice didn't fix the past, but it stopped the bleeding. I stand, rinse the cup, and glance at the clock. 7:23. A new rhythm, steady as the breath I finally remember how to take. The photograph catches the light, the same one I fought to restore, the same light that stayed through every storm. I reach for the kettle again. My hands are steady now. I brew the tea myself. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moments stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story, with respect and gratitude.